Alright, hello there, I'm Stephen Colber. I work at Brunswick Secondary College just down the road, just off Sydney Road in fact. I'm a literacy improvement teacher and I'm in charge of assessment and reporting there. On the internet I'm at Mr. Colber's Teaching on YouTube, and on Twitter I'm at Stephen_Colber. Okay, so basically today we're going to be talking about instructional video for the purposes of teaching and learning, and briefly we'll touch on maybe a little bit about how you can use it as your role as a leader. So first thing, I've got a learning intention and a success criteria, which are basically my learning intention is for you to get a broad overview of the research involved in instructional video and to get a little bit of an insight into the options that you could pursue if this was something you're interested in. I won't be up here talking for the whole duration, but there will be time for you to actually engage with these ideas, either to basically two options: explore the actual forms that you might pursue, but either at your school or at your home, for whatever purpose you choose, or alternative to actually create a short little video and get involved. Alright, so basically I'll give you three definitions. Firstly, instructional video is just that, video for the purpose of instruction, so teaching and learning focused stuff. The second thing is flipped learning, which is a pedagogy, and that's a little bit more complicated than just instructional video. Today we're focusing on instructional video. Flipped learning is something I'm very passionate about and very interested in, but essentially flipped learning is a pedagogy that flips the normal dynamic between work done in class and a little bit of work done at home. In essence, a little bit more work done during homework, the individual space, which frees up time to do more interesting things in the group space. But having said that, you need a fairly large bank of instructional video to really consider flipped learning, unless you're doing it without videos, and so that's, to me, a further step down the line. The third thing is just blended learning, which is a lot more approachable, I guess. It's just a blend of online learning, so discussions and video and all those sort of elements, with also face-to-face teaching. And as Lauren Sayer would say in a presentation I saw her do recently, blended learning, the key element there is the teacher themselves. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary of the research, just to give you a bit of a why as to why you might investigate instructional video. So this is an overly complicated diagram which I'm not going to explain in too much detail for you, but essentially this is a combination of the cognitive load theory, which is basically breaking the way that the brain processes information into three separate chunks, and also a little fourth one, which is multimedia input. So basically your brain has two input channels. One is visual, what you see with your eyes, and one is auditory, so essentially what you read and what you hear. The multimodal effect is essentially that you can somehow gain more input, or information travels more easily, or something along those lines, if it's multimodal. So video is better because it is audio plus visual combined. Alright, and I can't really explain that to you in any more detail than that because I'm not a cognitive scientist, but I've read a fair bit around these sort of concepts, and so that's something that's generally understood in the literature, that multimedia, in this case video, is superior to other forms of input for teaching and learning purposes. So just to sum that up, basically it's better than a worksheet, it's better than a PowerPoint with audio, and it's even better than an animated PowerPoint. So when you have sort of like an animated element there describing things, basically a video with you talking is superior as a individual learning resource when compared to the other elements we're looking at here. And just to reiterate, so the multimodal principle is basically that multimodal video is better, students get more input more easily, and they're calling on multiple parts of their brain to do that. And some people have suggested that video increases motivation and engagement, especially when it's actually by the person that teaches them, so the creator rather than a curator of video. Alright, at this point I want to ask you sort of where you're at in terms of all this stuff, and then we'll come back to the 7 affordances of e-learning. Okay, so the first question, we're just talking about basically podcasting, recording audio. So the three questions are, just as it says up on the screen, I'll ask you to get out a phone, or preferably a second screen if you can. You just fill in the link at the top and it'll take you to this, and then you'll be able to complete and respond to questions throughout the presentation. There's not that many, but just get an idea of where we're at as a group. Okay, so the second one is actually video. So have you videoed yourself? Have you videoed yourself for instructional purposes? And or have you also actually made an instructional video in the sense of a screencast or something similar? Okay, so if you're one of the people that's kind of in the bottom column, you've done not the bottom column, rather the third from the bottom. You've done all of those things. I'll give you a brief summary of the research, which we call the 7 affordances of e-learning, which is basically, I won't go through each of them, and obviously it's an overly complicated phrasing and an overly complicated and dense slide, to be completely honest, but just to illustrate the point, if you have online learning content and e-learning content, it gives you a lot more flexibility around how and when and how your students can access the content that you've created. So one of those elements is ubiquitous learning, and so if you're one of those people that's already made a screencast, you've recorded audio of yourself for learning purposes and you've recorded video for your own purposes, what I'm going to challenge you to do is essentially, if you've already done all these things, I'm assuming that you're relatively expert in this area. So at this point I'm going to get you to pause listening to me, essentially. Get your device out and go to YouTube and search up Mr. Culver's teaching. You're looking for the most recent video, and I would like you to watch a filming of the presentation, which is weird that I'm now explaining that in a video that you'll be watching. Skip up to the bit where you're up to, maybe put on 1.25 or 1.5 speed, and then just play through the presentation, and then that'll give you a little bit more flexibility and a lot more time to actually explore the website that I've created and to see the resources that you're going to be accessing to make, not necessarily for your first video, but a different type of video in comparison to the one. Okay, this slide is just a simple illustration and a bit of a personal anecdote of how I got into flipped learning. After teaching English at year 9 for probably 5, 6 or 7 years in a row, there was just certain content that needed to be drilled and skilled, kind of repeated, so that students understood it. That's not really how English generally works, but in this case it's something that's very important. So the content I was teaching was poetry meta language, so things like enjambment, rhyming couplets, things like that, things students just need to know. I taught these many years in a row, so I had a PowerPoint that kind of illustrated all of them in alphabetical order, and they're all numbered off, and I'd given examples, and I felt like my teaching of that content probably wasn't going to improve beyond that point. And so what I did was I used a very basic version of a screen recorder back then on an older laptop than the one I've got now, my department laptop. It looks like I'd put Vaseline on the lens itself. There was strange music at the start. You could actually see the screen recording software mirroring all the way back as the video began. But this was my first video, and about 36 kids watched it, or the students that I had watched it 36 times, and at that point I thought that was pretty much, I'd made it. That was amazing. I was just completely stunned by that. And then just on the right hand side, you can see a more recent one from July of this year, where I'm using green screen as I am now. Right, so that's kind of the why of instructional video, why I think it's worth exploring and worth doing, a little bit of a personal anecdote of why I did it and why I continue to do it. Basically, it allows me continuously to be refreshing my teaching and to be doing things in a different way. Obviously, a big part of my life is learning new things, and part of that means not teaching content that I've already mastered the teaching of, or I feel I've mastered, which might sound a bit stuck up or whatnot, but essentially I feel like that's something that's locked away. It will be evergreen in the sense that unless they develop new poetic techniques since the last time I researched it, it's pretty much stable. It's going to stay there. It's a useful resource regardless of year levels, and it's kind of something I can call on again and again. So we've gone through the why, a bit of an anecdote of why I do it and continue to do it, and a tiny little taste of the research and what it says about instructional video and why you might explore it. So at this point we're going to pause. I'm going to throw it over to you. So you've got a tiny little booklet in front of you. You're looking at the front sheet that says existing technology audit. I'm going to give you about 8 to 10 minutes to explore that, maybe discuss it with the people at your table. And but firstly, just consider for your own personal repertoire, what do you have available to you? And then also consider your school. So what does your school have available? How much money do you have available? What budget do you have? All those sort of things. So I'll give you 8 to 10 minutes. I'll come circulate around and see what people have got and how prepared or unprepared they are to sort of adopt instructional video in their own practice or in their school practice. Okay, so at this point you've sort of, I hope, got a bit of a list of the things that you might be interested in pursuing, the things that you already have available obviously, but also there's a list of suggestions for each of the columns to get you thinking about other avenues you might pursue, things maybe you didn't realize could do instructional video or you could be used for that purpose. and you're starting to form a bit of a picture of how likely or how interested you are in exploring this. Obviously, I'm not necessarily forcing you into this, but I genuinely think it's something worth pursuing in and of itself, and I've personally experienced a lot of positive outcomes as a result of it, so take that for what it is. So just in terms of workflow, you're looking at it pretty much exactly the same as you would the shooting of a film. There's your pre-production, which for a teacher just means teaching. In my case, quite often I make videos after I've taught a concept, or like I said in my previous example, after I've taught something multiple times. So that's your pre-production. For most teachers, like, you're not going to write a script because you talk for a living. That's what you do every day in front of students, and so there's really not that much pre-production that goes into it. It might be preparing a PowerPoint or preparing notes, or however you work. Essentially, your teacher work is your pre-production. There's not really any added steps, or you don't need to do a storyboard or anything like that. Then your next step is just your filming. So you're going to stand in front of some sort of recording device, and then you're going to talk to it. Probably at the start it's going to be mostly talking into a webcam or your phone on a tripod or something pretty simple, nothing overly complicated. If you like, you could edit at this stage. We'll talk about that a bit more in a sec. And then finally, the last step is just to make it available somewhere. So to put on YouTube, ClickView, or Microsoft Stream is the obvious choice. So in terms of editing, my suggestion is always, whenever possible, do it without editing. So you're just going to do a one take. Essentially what you're trying to do is make a short video, so anywhere between 3 and 6 minutes. If you can't do it in one clear first take, basically start again or pause it. Often I find when I'm filming something, I'll speak, and then I'll pause and my brain will think, and I'll consider what I'm going to say, and then I'm ready to go again. So in that situation, I would pause as soon as I realize I've run out of ideas, and then press, the film record button when I'm actually ready to continue on and I've got my next idea sort of mapped out in my head. So that's not necessarily best practice, but it is the easiest practice, and that's kind of what we're all about in teaching, doing the least amount of work for the most amount of benefit for our students. And in this case, I believe instructional video does that. If you were, the two programs I use primarily are Camtasia and Adobe Premiere Pro. Adobe Premiere Pro is a lot more showy and a lot more complicated, a lot more bells and whistles. Camtasia is pretty much, if you can make a PowerPoint, you can edit in Camtasia. Like, it's a lot of dragging blocks around, a lot of shortcuts for editing. It's really easy. It is also expensive though, as both of these products. If you want to explore editing, I would just suggest Adobe Spark. It's a really stripped down version. You can do it in your phone or on your computer, or even I think in a browser, so it's really simplistic. I've shot and edited a video within my own iPhone at one point using this software, so it can do pretty much everything you need to do. Alright, at this point I want you to open up your booklet. You're looking at a very poorly designed table. It's got some green squares, some blue squares. I'm just going to give you 3 minutes to, considering obviously what you decided in terms of the technology you have available, the existing technology audit. You're now going to think of, firstly, do you know what each of these forms are? Are you interested in editing or not? Are you sort of excluding those ones? And then finally, looking at the technology you have available and this list of forms, which ones you're interested in pursuing. And then I'll get you to use the app to actually tell me which ones you're interested in, which ones you're not, and I'll try and expand the ones that you're interested in and then kind of fly over the ones that you're not. Okay, so I've broken it down into basically 4 tiers. The first one is in-device or external device. Basically, you're thinking your iPhone, your Surface Pro, your MacBook, whatever it is. The second one, you're just looking at boards, so whiteboards, lightboards, things you write on, essentially. The third is classroom, observation, or video on demand. So that's essentially you're filming something that takes place within your class, and there are some barriers to that, but it can be done. And then the last one is green screen, which is the option that I most often use just because it's relatively easy, produces quite a good outcome, looks reasonably professional, and it allows you to interact directly with the sort of content that you're showing people. So at this point, again, get your app out and tell me what form you're most interested in of those 4. And as I said, I'll try and answer questions as we go and try to expand on the ones that you're more interested in. Okay, so this is just one element of each of the slides. Basically, there's a couple of different forms within each of the tiers, and each of them I'll have a little graph like this. It's very simple. On the left-hand side, you've got cost. On the right hand side you've got complexity, and there'll be a red line in between, and I've just obviously done that in Paint. It's not swish looking or anything like that. So if someone was very costly, that obviously involves money, and complexity is how much sort of technical know-how, how much personal effort you're going to have to put into making one of these things. So first, the easiest in-device or external device. I realised that the slide behind me is relatively complex and there's a whole lot of information stuffed into it. I'm not really going to go into that much detail, but the slides will be available after, or you can watch the video on demand if you're interested. But basically, in-device is, as I said, you're filming in-device or using an iPhone. You can do that in a bunch of different ways, but basically it's very cost-effective in the sense you already have this stuff lying around. And also it's not that complex because, again, you're preferably not editing and you're doing it all in one device, and it's relatively simple. And then there's sort of your external document camera. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could do this. You can just sort of get a cord and connect up your iPhone and get the right software. You can even do it wirelessly if you really want to show off. You can connect your device to a projector. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could do it. The one pictured here is the device that I've got now, after many years of using a little plastic clip and a flexible arm attached to my iPhone so that wiggles around and all those sort of things, and a little lapel mic. I finally upgraded and got one of these, which is sort of an all-in-one solution. It's got a microphone inside, a light, it plugs directly into your computer through a USB, so it's pretty easy, and it can do everything you want pretty slickly. But obviously if you're interested in exploring this, you're not going to jump and instantly pay out a bunch of cash for this. You're going to start with sort of more achievable steps. And on the website there's a bit of a summary of sort of how you might go about doing that. Our next tier, of course, is just your boards. So starting super simply, basically you standing in front of a whiteboard, turning over your shoulder and presenting to your students, or you can kind of pre-draw your whiteboard, but in essence you're just talking to the camera and there's diagrams, hand-drawn diagrams, and you can kind of flick on to the next one. Those sort of things, very straightforward, very easy. Again, you're using a whiteboard that you already have, you're using textures that you already have, and you're using a little cheap tripod to support your iPhone or similar. So all those things you already have, it's kind of easy to do. Alright, so this is where the board element takes a jump in complexity straight away. Studies have shown pretty firmly and clearly that what I just described is inferior to a Lifeboard, which is where you are facing forward. You're drawing on a piece of glass, then you're flipping the video and so forth. It gives, obviously the benefit is facial expression, gesture, excitement, all those sort of things, as well as the actual information being drawn, and you can gesture towards the things that you've drawn and so forth. So that's an improvement, which means if you're interested in exploring that as an option, you might want to start with whiteboard stuff first, just to sort of get a proof of practice happening, that students are watching it and you're sort of able and capable to make them. And then you're jumping towards Lifeboard. So I've recently constructed my own within the space of the last year. There's a whole bunch of people pictured behind me that are the experts who helped me in this process and actually got me where I needed to go. Mine's a little bit different because obviously I'm relatively tall. I actually embedded mine within a whiteboard. And now recently we've just made a move at our school to, as a follow-on from a previous conference that I attended through IWBNet, run by Margot, my learning technologies leader was brought out, and he essentially decided that it would be interesting to have all these things, and then I was able to say that I have them already, and so we're in the process now of getting the Lifeboard from where it is in my shed into our school, so that then potentially more teachers will be able to use it. But Lifeboard, massive jump in complexity. The cost is relatively low. You could get one done for a couple of $100 or $500. But the complexity comes from the fact that you actually have to build it. So you need to look up plans. It's very much like kind of a summer holiday or a holiday task, something to get sorted out. It's quite complicated, it's not easy, but it is a very rewarding process to actually make your own custom Lifeboard to your own design. Having said that, you want to drop the complexity right down and increase the cost massively. You can get a custom made Lifeboard. There's probably even some out on the kind of seminar floor outside, but you're looking at kind of tens of thousands of dollars usually, or kind of in the high $5,000 or $6,000. But of course, it's custom made. It's made to your specifications in many situations, and it's relatively easy in that sense. the output is pretty much the same, I guess. Third is classroom observation or video on demand. So I separate those two out, but it's essentially the same thing. If your purpose is to observe your peers, we would call it a classroom observation video. You might use something like a Swivel to film that, and then you're sort of watching back kind of as a play-by-play, similar to what you might watch a sports game back if you were a coach. So that's classroom on demand. Video on demand is essentially the same thing, but you are doing it personally as a teacher and making it available to your students. So the obvious example is Eddie Wu. He had sick kids that were out in hospital and such within his class, and so he began filming his lessons so that they could engage with them after the fact. Obviously the key thing that Eddie Wu has is that his lessons are engaging. If you're producing relatively crappy class activities or relatively crappy lectures in class, filming them will not necessarily make them more interesting, and it certainly won't guarantee that students will watch them. So this isn't something I've done a whole bunch of just for those reasons. I don't think I'm an especially exciting, engaging speaker at the best of times, so I feel like I'd probably just have a whole bunch of unwatchable footage of me doing the day in and day out thing of explaining things to students. Having said that, complexity is relatively high. Surprisingly, the most complex element of this is that you need to record video. Obviously, that's easy. Anyone could do that. You set up your iPhone, you press the red button, and it starts recording. The hard part is the audio, especially if you have a class that is filled with teenagers and they make any noise at all, which from my experience is all of them. You instantly have a barrier where you need a separate device to be picking up your audio. And as soon as you add in two devices, you add in another layer of complexity, and then you probably have to edit them together or splice them together or something of that nature. And of course it becomes more complicated. But keeping that in mind, it's relatively affordable, but it is complex in the sense that you need a wireless microphone solution or multiple devices, so complexity is high. So we've just got a bunch of different ways of doing it, like I said, but of course the complex element is the audio. So a Swivel is sort of an all-in-one package that can do it for you. You rest your iPhone within a robot. It's basically a bay that moves around. You have a wireless microphone around your neck, and the camera will follow you, and the monitor will pick up the audio that you speak. Okay, so tier 4 is my personal favorite. You're looking at green screen. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to do this. It's actually a lot more accessible than you might first think. For many years, my setup was rolls of green poster paper that I got from the art faculty at my school, and some blue tack that I got similarly from a cupboard. Put blue tack on the wall, put the large sheets of green poster paper on the wall, and that was my setup. That was my green screen. I bought 2 relatively cheap Lightbox sort of photographic lights, and I lit the wall, and then through an editing process. So of course this does involve editing. You can't just kind of green screen without any programs connected. You can actually live remove green screen, but again, that's of course increasing the complexity as you go. People do it all over the world to stream video games, so it's doable. Even punk teenage kids can do it, so us as experienced educators can definitely achieve it as well. But having said that, you can get sort of a custom-made green screen that'll pop up, pop down, fold up, fold down. You could get one that sits behind your office chair, like a little bit of a halo effect. The most important thing is lighting. If you can get consistent lighting without shadows behind you, then you can remove a green screen reasonably easily. Note streaming, pretty much the guy pictured is the only guy that I know of who does it. I've done it basically to a testing level. I can produce videos in this way. It's not something I find super necessary, but the benefit is essentially you're standing in front of a green screen behind you. You have a OneNote open, or I guess you could use other proprietary product as well, but his example is obviously a Microsoft Innovative Education Expert, as am I. So he's using OneNote, he's got his stylus out, probably on his Surface Pro. Let's name drop some more products while we're at it. So he's live removing his green screen as he speaks. You can see the setup in the picture that it's quite complicated, very, very much like a state-of-the-art system. But anyway, he's standing in front of a pedestal, and what he is doing is filming a video of him talking with the OneNote behind him that is then uploaded to OneNote. So it's quite, matrixy stuff, but basically your students are inside your OneNote watching a video of you interact with the OneNote and stepping them through the process they need to go through. Alright, so that's me all talked out. At this point you've got a range of options to explore. You've thought about your budget and what technology you have already around. A lot of the shift in terms of using instructional video is just thinking of the things you're probably already doing, Snapchatting and FaceTiming and filming yourself, but actually applying that to the teaching context that you exist within. So there's not necessarily that much stuff you need to go out and buy. You're already doing these things, it's just a bit of a mental shift towards actually applying them to your classroom and your school setting. So at this point I'm talked out. What I would love for you to do is go to this link, and you basically, it's a little website that gives you options, the same tiers that I've taken you through, the same forms. There's references if you really want to explore the references for the research. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I haven't talked about that sort of went into the making of this presentation. But you've got two options at this point. You're either investigating things you might want to purchase or software you might want to buy or those sort of things, or, and I think this is a lot more interesting, you're going to the first one, which is in-device filming essentially, and I just want you to make a short minute or less video testing out some of the functionality that you may not have known you could already do within your own device. Alright, I'm going to circulate and kind of see what you're up to, and then I'll bring us all back for 10 minutes before the end of this session. I'll take you through a little bit of a summary of the lessons I've learned and the research that I've used to support those findings that I've... Alright, so we're getting close to the end of this session. I would like you to turn to the last little page of the booklet you've got in front of you, and this is just a summary of the research. So I'll give you 5 minutes to read through it, then I'll answer any questions that you may have. But in essence, all of these things I can prove through personal experience. I've made a lot of videos, and I've seen YouTube gives you quite accurate analytics of who's watching what, how long they're engaged for, all those sort of things. So I can back most of these things up from personal experience and the analytics of YouTube. But this is my summary of the research and what it shows. A lot of this is suggestive. You'll notice that there's a column for theory, so these are theoretical things. This is not definite, guaranteed for sure, but this is an emerging space, so we're relying on theories, leaning on theories, leaning on theories. So a lot of this is my interpretation on top of the research findings and trying to piece things together. And I think if you read through it, you get a pretty clear picture of what I think is involved in making a quality instructional video. Alright, so if there's any questions at this point, I'll take those. Otherwise, I'll leave you to read through that information. And thank you very much for coming out and seeing my presentation. Cheers.